On this episode of China Unscripted, the Chinese Communist Party releases a new coronavirus death toll, which is also fake. How the Communist Party extends its tentacles everywhere. And we talk to a Wisconsin state senator who's standing up to Chinese propaganda. Hi, welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Jong.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
Joining us today is Wisconsin State Senate President Roger Roth. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So you got not one, but two emails from the Chinese consulate with a pretty bold request. For listeners who might not know the story, what happened?
Yeah, so the Chinese consulate in Chicago reached out to me on February 26th, and they wanted me to introduce a resolution in the Wisconsin State Assembly that praised the Communist Party of China for their handling of the coronavirus and what they called their quick and transparent response. And when I read the emails, my staff puts my emails in front of me at the beginning of each morning. I read it, and then I looked at the signature part or the sending part, and I saw that it came from a Hotmail account. And I just laughed. I said, this has to be a hoax. Nobody uses Hotmail, not particularly, the Chinese consulate. So I threw it away. About a week and a half later, they reached out to me again. And they said, we're just following up on our earlier email, wondering if you might be willing to introduce a resolution that they provided me, talking about their quick response, praising the Communist Party of China. So when I got the second one, I told my staff, okay, I think this is a hoax, but go see if you can validate this email address. So they worked through some connections in government, and lo and behold, this actually is a legitimate email address for the consul in Chicago. And apparently we found out that these the Chinese routinely use private email for embassy work because they find that it's a lot faster, I've been told, than their official email channels.
Wow.
So when I realize now at this point that on two occasions they've reached out to me. They've wanted me to pass a resolution that they wrote in our Wisconsin State Senate. And this was, in fact, legitimate. I got downright mad. And I told my staff, I said, I dictated an email, and I said, send this out right now. Dear Consul, nuts. Signed, Senator Roger Roth. So we sent that out to them. Of course, they responded to that like a day or two later, and they're like, oh, we don't understand.
Are you asking to share some nuts with us? Why, thank you.
Yeah, right. Like, oh, we're coming in the spirit of cooperation and all this other kind of nonsense.
Oh, gosh.
But the reason I was so mad was because when I found out that was real now, and this was about towards the middle end of March when we had authenticated it, that's just when things started ramping up on the coast of the United States. And we started hunkering down here in Wisconsin. And you realize that when you read the resolution, and I'll make sure to provide you a copy of it if you don't already have it, they're talking about this window of opportunity that they created for the world to prepare. It's total nonsense. The only window of opportunity that the Communist Party of China gave the world in their response was an opportunity for this virus to spread around the world to the point where you couldn't contain it. That's the window of opportunity they gave us. And they were not quick and transparent. And that's where I was so furious. I went home. That was on a Friday that I sent the nuts and everything. Came back on that next Monday. I told my staff, we are introducing a resolution on China. It's just not the one that the Communist Party of China wants us to introduce. So I told them, I want this, and we started drafting. I want this. It's got to accomplish three things. First, we're going to tell the truth about the Communist Party of China's cover-up here when it relates to the coronavirus and how they endangered the free people around the world. All the people now who have infections, all the people dying, it's all a result of their lies. Secondly, we're going to expose the CCP over the last 70 years for their human rights violations, their gross human rights violations that for some reason the world has turned a blind eye to. And third, I want to make sure in this resolution that we show the distinction between the Chinese people and the Communist Party of China. And I think when you read our resolution, that will come out very clearly. We absolutely stand in support and solidarity of the Chinese people. These folks have just been held hostage by a cruel and brutal regime these past 70 years. And I, like you, like many freedom-loving people around the world, long for the day when the CCP will no longer exist and the people of China can rise up in freedom and prosperity.
Well, it's a great resolution. We've all read the text of it, and you really hit a number of very specific issues, including the detention of Uyghurs and the forced abortions and sterilizations, the organ harvesting. You really nailed a whole bunch of issues in that resolution. It was very clear.
Yeah, and the reason we put those in there, I appreciate that, but the reason we put those in there were, if you go down the street, in New York or Chicago or even here in Wisconsin, no one's probably heard of the Uyghur Muslims in China. And they would probably, if you ask them, do you think somewhere in the world right now that there's a 1.5 million Muslims who are in concentration camps? Do you think that's happening right now? And people would be like, no, this is 2020. There aren't concentration camps anymore. Yet there are. And the world press and not exclusively, but to a large extent, the world press and world governments have turned a blind eye to these human rights violations. And that's why we have to expose it, and I'm doing it in every way that I can.
So were you aware of all of these issues with China when you got these initial emails, or was this something you discovered through the course of the coronavirus?
No, I was when it comes to their human rights violations, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I do read a lot of global news sources, and so I was aware of the things that they had been doing in the plight of some of the minority populations within their country. But again, when I saw now, China's parading themselves around the world, the Communist Party of China parading themselves around the world. Oh, look at us. We want to help you. Here's some masks. Here's a couple of ventilators. I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is totally opposite of who they are and what they've done. And that's why, I know why the CCP reached out to me to pass this resolution. They never explicitly said it, but I know why they reached out to me to try and get the free people of Wisconsin to pass this resolution, just like I know why they're pressuring Angela Merkel in Germany and other countries around the world to praise them for what they're doing. And it's because these people, these brutal dictatorships, they're all the same, and they crave legitimacy from folks like us so that they can go back through their state-run news networks and other media and misinform their people and let them know that, hey, in this state of Wisconsin, part of the United States, look at this. They're praising us for what we're doing. See, we are doing such a great job. And this resolution that we're introducing is going to deny them that opportunity. And I'm not the only one, I can't be the only one that they reached out to. I'm calling on legislators all over the United States and folks in government around the world who've been approached by the CCP. It's time to stand up and say no to them and to let them know the truth so that they can have that thing that they most desperately crave, and that's legitimacy from the public opinion of the world. We cannot give them that.
I'm curious, had you ever been approached by the Chinese consulate before this?
Not that I'm aware of. So I have no record of them ever reaching out to me on any capacity. I've never been to China. I have, though I would love to. I long for the day when China is free because I can't wait to go there. I'd love to take my boys and walk the Great Wall of China and see some of the other wonderful artifacts and just things expressing the civilization that had been flourishing there for thousands of years. But no, I haven't. So the only thing I can think of, and I've been asked that question a lot, the only thing I can think of is that they approached me. If you go online and look up the Wisconsin State Senate, my picture comes as Senate President. It's the first picture that comes up. And I just assuming that they thought, well, this is the person that we would approach maybe to pass something like this. But clearly, if they don't know it, if they didn't know it before, they know it now. They picked the wrong guy.
Well, are you concerned this might have hurt the feelings of the Chinese people and damaged Wisconsin-China relations for all eternity?
Well, I will tell you this: I am not concerned in the least that it hurt the feelings of the Chinese people. I think the great Chinese people, to the extent that they can hear this and are aware of this, take a lot of hope and comfort in it. I do believe that it hurt the feelings of the Chinese consulate in Chicago and the CCP in Beijing, just in all the news reports and reporters and networks that have been reaching out to me as we've been talking about this. They kind of, at first, they were responding and they kind of went in lockdown. So they're not talking to anybody anymore. And I'm glad. I hope that this lets them know that here in Wisconsin, I can't speak for the whole United States, though I believe it's true too, but we're not going to be bullied by them. And they're able to do what they can do to their own people in mainland China right now, just because of the control that they have. But that's not going to last forever. And the people of China, and that's why we in the West, we have to let them know that we stand with them in solidarity, that we're here to support them, because I know that they love freedom as much as we do here in America. And the day's going to come in the not too distant future when they're going to be able to challenge the CCP for the control of their destiny. And I cannot wait for that to happen.
Well, so I'm curious, what do you think of the World Health Organization? Because they have been very willing to praise the Chinese Communist Party, particularly for its transparency. A lot of the same things they apparently wrote in the resolution they wanted you to pass.
Yeah, well, I think the more we learn, just like the more we learn about China, this was something that, we only got the information we got from them, and it took a while for the truth to come out. The truth is starting to come out about the World Health Organization, and you're seeing, is you already know that the president now is calling he's going to stop funding. The United States funds 22% of the World Health Organization's budget. He's going to pull back on that until some questions get answered. There are going to be hearings in Washington trying to uncover the truth here between how the CCP and the World Health Organization were able to lie to the world. I've got serious problems, and I'll tell you, the WHO, the only reason they exist is to help prevent pandemics like this from spreading around the world. Yet the results of their actions have been that a pandemic that could have been stopped and kept just in mainland China has now spread around the world. So they've clearly failed their core mission. And I applaud the president for withholding their funding. And I look forward to seeing what the hearings on Capitol Hill will reveal here, because it seems that in everything we know so far, that there has been a pretty cozy relationship between the CCP and the WHO. And if we learn anything from what we're going through right now, it's that we've got to unlink those two, so that going into the future, we can make sure that the world is prepared if something like this were to happen again.
I'm curious, have you, since putting out your resolution, have you heard back from the Chinese consulate?
I have not. And like I mentioned before, several of the news organizations that have reached out to me have tried. A couple of them initially were talking to people within the consulate's office there in Chicago, but then they went in complete lockdown mode. And I know why they did it. I mean, they most certainly have egg on their face right now, but and they realize that what they tried to do sort of backfired on them. But no, they have, to my knowledge, haven't reached out to me that I'm aware of.
Well, I'm curious, have you tried faxes? Because I know the only way to communicate with the New York consulate is through fax. So I think faxes and Hotmail really are the way the consulate handles it.
That is interesting. I know that they by now have read my resolution, and they can't be happy with it, because it goes against the misinformation campaign that they're currently actively engaging in around the world. And I'm hoping that when people recognize this, when the CCP reaches out to government officials and to business leaders and asks them to do something, they're not doing it in good faith. There's a reason that they're doing it, and it's all because they've got the CCP. They have their tentacles. They have their tentacles in academia here in the United States. They have it in our media. They have it in our business community. They're trying to get it in government. And when they have those relationships, they try to flex those to their advantage. And that's why it's imperative that people do the opposite about what the CCP wants them to do. Because all we're doing if we were to pass a resolution like this, all we're doing is hurting the good people of China who are forced to live under this cruel dictatorship.
Have you heard from any of your colleagues about this story? Like, what have their reactions been?
Yes, many of them have reached out to me in support. They've thanked me. They've applauded what we're doing, and they look forward to the day that we can bring this up on the floor of the Senate, my resolution on the floor of the Senate, and pass it. So I've actually, the more this story has sort of gotten out there and other places have covered it and it's picked up steam over the last few weeks, I've had people from across Wisconsin and across the United States reaching out to my office. There was a gentleman who emailed my office. He doesn't live in Wisconsin right now. He spent the first 21 years of his life in Wisconsin. Now he lives in the southern United States. But he said, I was born in Beloit, Wisconsin. I grew up in Ashland, which is in northern Wisconsin. He said he witnessed many UW-Madison men's hockey championships. He witnessed many UW-Madison basketball Final Four appearances. He witnessed 2 Packers, that's our professional football team, the Green Bay Packers, winning 2 Super Bowls. He said never in his life has he been more proud to be from Wisconsin than right now because of this. And this is a gentleman who has lost his job because of the coronavirus. And that really emboldened me because in Wisconsin, just like in everywhere else across our country, we're sheltering at home because of this. We have people who have millions have lost their jobs. Tens of thousands have lost their lives. Hundreds of thousands have been infected. And it's all because the Communist Party of China lied to the world. Studies have shown that had they acted in a responsible way from the beginning, 95% of the world cases would never have happened. Governments wouldn't be shut down, the economy wouldn't be shut down in the United States and the rest of the world had they acted in good faith. And hundreds of thousands of people would be alive had they acted responsibly. And they didn't. And that's why this truth has to come out. That's why they have to be held accountable, because they're out there, as I mentioned before, parading themselves around like they're the great saviors and look at all the good that they're doing. No, they are the reason the world and our economy is in chaos right now, and they must be held accountable.
I'm just curious. I know you said there's been a lot of support for your resolution from across the country. Would you say this has been bipartisan support?
That is yet to be determined. I do think that this is becoming less and less. Anytime you have the President of the United States, is you and your listeners has been very tough on mainland China for a long time. And a lot of people, more on the conservative side in particular, news organizations have been exposing the truth on what's been happening here when it relates to the CCP. So I think, though, initially it is something where it's probably a higher preponderancy of Republicans than Democrats at this moment are understanding of the truth and supportive of standing up to mainland China. I will tell you that in the final analysis, as this thing works through, when these investigations are done, when we fully have the truth before us, you're going to find that the vast majority of Americans, both Republican and Democrat, will stand in unison against what the CCP has unleashed across the world.
So Wisconsin, famous for cheese and standing up to the Chinese Communist Party.
That's right. Yeah. We don't like people trying to come in here and subvert our democracy, and that's what they try to do. They tried to use the levers of a freely elected people in a free government to manipulate the way we do things so that they can go spread misinformation not only around the world but to their own people. But we're not going to do that. We're not going to allow them to get away with this.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Senator Roth, and thank you for that resolution. It really was like a wish list of calling out the Communist Party's crimes.
Well, I appreciate being on, and I appreciate the work that you guys do. And everything that I'm doing right now, it's just to spread the truth, to stand up against the CCP and spread the truth about what they've been doing. And I really do long for the day. This, I believe, is the CCP's Chernobyl moment. This is the moment in time where the world looks at what they did, just like with communist Russia, and how they covered up Chernobyl, poisoned their own people, allowed the radiation plume to go across Eastern Europe. This is the moment where the CCP now is going to be held accountable if we stand up against them, where their own people recognize just how they've been lied to. This is the moment that can spell the beginning of the end for the CCP, and I look forward to voicing this in any way that I can to speed that day.
Awesome. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, keep up the good work. I'm looking forward to hearing about this resolution getting passed.
Awesome. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Wow, I never imagined I would enjoy listening to a politician.
Like I didn't want to ask this, but I almost feel like I wonder if he's watched our show. Just because like his talking points in the bill, Senate Resolution 7, are like every single one of those topics we've hit on China Uncensored or China Unscripted. And like the way he laid it out is very clear-headed. So maybe this is just a situation where it's just a confluence of people all seeing this truth at the same time, or he was a fan of our show.
I think that's a little presumptuous.
I'd like
Matt.
to toot my own horn as much as the next person, but I don't think we're the only ones talking about those points.
No, I don't think so.
Well, I mean, when I read the resolution that the Chinese consulate had provided versus his resolution, it was hilarious, the contrast.
I love it when the Communist Party tries to do something and it just backfires to the extreme.
Well, I think, and Senator Roth made this point, and I had actually been wondering about this as well, is like how many other state governments did the Chinese consulate reach out to?
And they dismissed it because it was Hotmail.
Maybe. I mean, I'm sure most state governments, they're worried about some more important things right now than passing a resolution praising the Chinese government. But I think it's very possible. I mean, this is the Chinese consulate in Chicago that reached out to them. So they were obviously probably reaching out. They're not going to reach out to Wisconsin and not Illinois, or, they're definitely reaching out. And then who knows about the Chinese consulate in San Francisco, LA, the Chinese embassy, the consulate in New York. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a more coordinated...
A 50-state effort.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's a 50-state effort, but, I mean, it could just be the Chinese consulate in Chicago deciding that they have this great initiative.
I just got to say, I love the Wisconsin accent. But to your point, Shelley, that's a similar tactic I know the Chinese Communist Party has been using with that show Shun Yun, where they get like consulates to reach out to theaters or politicians and say, oh, this is a very bad anti-China show, don't go.
Right, like when we were in Seoul, South Korea, this is 2016, Chris.
Yeah.
Like there was that KBS theater, which is connected to the Korean government, and then the Chinese embassy in South Korea threatened the theater that if they were to hold the Shun Yun show, then it would not only affect the theater, but also KBS's like television, because they also have a TV station, affect their television broadcasts in China. And like this whole, thing would come down on them just for allowing like a couple performances of Shun Yun.
Actually, for those listening, we were planning to be in Korea right now for their election. But this was obviously before the CCP virus spread all over the world and made travel a little difficult.
Yeah. What a what a different year it's turned out to be.
Yeah.
Well, I think in terms of the Chinese consulates using state governments, though, because I started looking into whether there have been resolutions passed that have supported, things related to China, and I found a resolution from last year, 2019, about the 40th anniversary of the. Or was it 2017? Now I'm getting the date mixed up. But it was for the 40th anniversary of U.S.-China relations, which makes me think maybe 2017 now. Anyway, 40th anniversary of U.S.-China relations, this resolution passed by the California State Assembly, the State Senate, I think, actually. And it was on the website of the Chinese consulate in San Francisco.
Wow.
As what a great thing that, they were using it for PR, just like Senator Roth was saying.
This is something they've been doing for a long time. Like you see, Matt, I know you have some personal connection to was it the San Francisco mayor and China's National Day?
Oh, no, I don't have any personal connection to it, but the mayor at the time of San Francisco, Ed Lee, he had, I never knew the guy, but he.
Oh, I thought you were living in San Francisco when he did that.
No, he had put the Chinese flag above City Hall to celebrate China's National Day, which is the day the Communist Party took over China. So it was kind of, it's a small story, but it's a big symbolically, I think.
An example of how the Chinese Communist Party is able to reach out and influence American politicians.
Yeah, but it's great, when you have elected officials like Senator Roth who are just like nuts.
Well, I think he is especially clear-headed about. He said he had already known. I think this is what happens if the consulate is able to reach an official who's a state level official who probably doesn't have to do a lot with foreign policy usually. So they may not be as familiar with what China has done in the past or what the Chinese Communist Party has done. So, they might be more likely to be like, oh, well, this seems reasonable. I mean, the way the resolution was phrased, it wasn't like, praise the Chinese Communist Party, but the propaganda elements were there if you knew what they were going for.
What kills me is like in that resolution the Communist Party wrote, it was like exactly the things the World Health Organization and its head, Dr. Tedros, have been saying all along about China and its coronavirus.
Well, that's because it's also the same. It's the same line, the propaganda line that's been pushed. The Chinese Communist Party started pushing this in Chinese state-run media in February, back when they were still dealing pretty heavily with the coronavirus outbreak in China themselves. In mid-February, they were already starting to say things like, well, we're containing the virus inside China. So, I mean, that turned out to be a line that they could only use for another week. But they're like, we're containing the virus inside China, which shows how successfully we fought it and we're saving the world. And that evolved into this whole window of opportunity idea.
And I was really impressed that Senator Roth even was able to pick up on the propaganda line about cooperation the Chinese Communist Party has been pushing. It's not we cooperate with each other. It's the U.S. cooperates with China and China keeps lying and stealing.
Well, I think your word for that on the last podcast, Shelley, was...
Oh, being complicit. Yeah. Oh, I found the resolution. So it was from last year. The Chinese consulate in San Francisco had... Now I wonder if they wrote the resolution, right?
Oh, gosh.
But it's, California state legislature members' resolution commemorates the 40th anniversary of China-U.S. diplomatic relations. It's from last September. And, you have a photo on the Chinese consulate in San Francisco's website of the consul general with the several members of the, California state legislature presenting this, gold-framed proclamation.
Oh, jeez.
It's just,
But I mean, there are sometimes officials who get, what's going on. This reminds me of there was a news video I saw. This is it's almost 20 years ago now. I think it was 2001. There was a small town in California called Santee, and the Chinese consulate had tried to pressure them, something related to Falun Gong, which at the time the Communist Party had just started persecuting Falun Gong in China. And they wanted the mayor of Santee to like issue some resolution condemning Falun Gong.
The mayor of Santee, California?
Yeah. I don't even know where exactly that is. It's like a small.
I think it's near San Diego because I used to live in San Diego, but it's a tiny town.
Yeah,
it's
a tiny town of which doesn't have a whole lot of national recognition, and yet the consulate reached out to the mayor of this small town and wanted them to support the Communist Party's persecution of Falun Gong, and the mayor was Randy Vopel, I think, basically did the equivalent of "Dear Consulate, nuts." And he passed his own. He wrote his own resolution supporting Falun Gong and condemning the persecution. So I think that it's nice that you do have individual people who are standing up to this.
But speaking of California and Falun Gong, I had also, when I first heard of this story in the Wisconsin Examiner and started looking up the whole issue of resolutions, found this story from 2017 from the AP called "California Resolution Shelved After Chinese Opposition."
Oh, so it's the opposite kind of thing.
So this California state senator tried to introduce a resolution condemning the persecution of Falun Gong that you were just talking about. And
a different resolution, but the same concept.
Yeah, same concept. So he tried to have a and resolutions, just to be clear, are just purely symbolic things. They don't have any, legal...
Like a New Year's resolution.
Actually kind of true. Like, it doesn't have any binding legal... It's not like passing a bill, right? It's not going to become a law. A resolution just is kind of a formal statement of something, and that you can then, print out in pretty font.
In a gold frame,
yes. It has like the big capital letter, the proclamation or whatever.
Yeah.
But so this resolution was condemning the persecution of Falun Gong. So symbolic. And then the Chinese consulate sent a letter to the California state legislature, like different lawmakers, like individual lawmakers, warning that it would be detrimental to relations between China and California. And after this whole pressure campaign, the California legislature shelved it.
I mean, that ties into, California has a large overseas Chinese community. This ties into the whole, United Front, the different ways the Chinese Communist Party influences Chinese people living abroad. I'm sure they got all kinds of local groups.
I mean, there's a whole rabbit hole. Just in San Francisco, where I grew up, there was a person who, she's no longer alive, Rose Pak, who was basically the boss of Chinatown and also the boss of Chinese people as they interacted with the San Francisco government. And she's basically, it's a little bit like being the head of a tong or a triad, but she wasn't exactly. But she kind of
Oh, it was the United Front stuff all the way.
Yeah, so the United Front Work Department is the Chinese Communist Party's division that does, among other things, tries to control and manipulate all overseas Chinese around the world.
And it is a branch of the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese government.
Right. And so, but it's kind of nebulous, and the edges of this are very fuzzy. So it's very hard to, lock down in a document exactly the scope of United Front work. But if you're used to seeing this, it's pretty obvious where it's happening. But it's also, even where it's obvious, it may be very difficult to find documentation of it. But anyway, so in San Francisco, you had someone, Rose Pak, and in other cities, probably other people. And her job was to, make sure that, for example, if, Falun Gong or Tibetans or, whoever wanted to have a parade in San Francisco, that there'd be pushback or that they'd be blocked from. I think Falun Gong was blocked for a couple of years for joining like a Chinese New Year parade. Rose Pak helped Mayor Ed Lee get elected. Ed Lee is like he's no longer alive, but he was a third generation Chinese American, but he got support from Pak, and then it's no surprise that he joined with the Chinese consulate celebrating the Communist Party's National Day by hanging the Chinese flag over City Hall. So, like, you know, all of these things you can say, oh, well, that's just, you know, him expressing his sentiment for the Chinese people. But behind all this is very likely this whole United Front Work Department pushing this agenda, you know, a little bit here, a little bit there, all in different ways, working through different people. I think Senator Roth had an interesting description about like the CCP has its tentacles in everything.
So yeah, the topic about how China tries to influence the U.S. government is a huge issue and a very important issue. Hopefully the coronavirus will be sort of the death knell for that. Knell? Is it Nell?
It's Nell.
Nell. Oh, Nelly.
Knell, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, also, like, I think the coronavirus really has exposed so much of the problems of the Chinese Communist Party. The big story, well, actually, I was going to go to the AP story, but first, what just came out is that
Wuhan has revised their death toll by 50%. Like, bringing it up.
You interrupted me, Shelley. I know how you feel all the time.
Well, just because I didn't want you to say doubled, because it's not doubled.
50% is not doubled. That's correct. You knew I was going to say doubled. You're same wavelength. Thank you, Shelley. So, yes, anyways, the Wuhan death toll numbers have doubled. And overnight. But no, seriously, like this just shows how fake the numbers are. And like, even though it went up by like 50%,
the national number is now like 4,600.
Yeah, it's still a ridiculously fake number. It's obviously a fake number.
When we were looking at the stats for the number of deaths and cases of coronavirus all around the world for the American Uncovered episode that we were doing about whether Trump botched the coronavirus response. So when we looked at the China numbers, it was laughable because it was 2 deaths per million people.
Insane. In the place where it began.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Italy was like 300 and some deaths per people. The U.S. is at 15 deaths per million people. Ireland was like 82. Like, it's just, if you look at the whole numbers, you understand that China's numbers are obviously not real.
Yeah, I think also what's interesting about them suddenly revising the figure up 50% is it's also implicit in there that they had not been giving us accurate numbers all the way up until this point, at least until this point.
Yeah. So to be clear, it's not that a bunch of people suddenly died. It's just that they went back and
it really feels like someone in the government, in the Communist Party, was like, oh gosh, everyone's criticizing us for how obviously fake our numbers are. Okay, let's have it go up a bit. And so then that's how you get, like, overnight, just a completely arbitrary fake increase.
Well, no, Chris, that's not what happened, because if you listen to Chinese state-run media, it's just a timely and responsible revision of death figures.
Yeah, timely and responsible, just like the way the Chinese Communist Party handled the outbreak from the beginning.
Oh my gosh. I wonder if it's going to be like the Great Famine and they just try and blame it on bad weather.
Yeah, so it's because they didn't have enough tests, and some grassroots clinics were not connected.
They made the tests. They were the only ones making tests and masks.
It was speaking of tests, the UK just got 20 million tests from China that don't work.
Oh, great.
Antibody tests that don't work.
Well, the antibody tests already have a very low success rate.
No, it was not 20 million, it's 2 million, but they spent, I think, 20 million. Let me double check that.
So this is one of those things where China gave in exchange for lots of money these
Well, I mean, if they spent 20 million for 2 million test kits, it's only $10 per test kit. So, I mean, like,
that don't work.
Yeah.
How much was the number, Shelley?
It is the UK paid $20 million for coronavirus tests.
Hey, guys, I got a great money-making idea. Let's get people sick and then make them buy from us testing kits and face masks and stuff to deal with the sickness that we infected them with. I think this is a great idea. I
think actually they're not purposely sending out faulty equipment because that makes it look bad for them. So, in fact, some of the reports I saw this week were that exports from China are being blocked again because now they're paranoid and they're like, we have to check everything before it goes out. So we stop getting these bad headlines, but then nothing can get exported because they can't check everything.
I mean, it's so shocking to me to hear that, maybe products made in China might have not great quality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an issue that's been happening for a long time. And a lot of the shoddy product quality issues some of those are related to the CCP and how they're unable to sort of regulate things and prevent, criminals from making fake materials and whatnot. That's why they have there's so many product scandals and the tainted milk scandal and fake vaccine scandal and so on.
I mean, I would say that it's gotten better since 2008, although the vaccines were much
There's
more
been a
recent
lot
than
of
that.
Vaccine scandals.
But, you have unscrupulous people. But the way the system is kind of designed, it kind of encourages counterfeiting in a certain way. Mm-hmm. Like the whole idea of the way that they can bring and copy technology from the U.S. and other countries. There's a whole system set up in place for that. So
reverse engineering technology.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is like copying or counterfeiting is not considered like a bad thing necessarily.
It's basically state-sanctioned cheating.
Until they get bad PR for it, right? Until they get in trouble for it.
Yeah, well, what makes the death toll number so strange is also this week there was a story in the Associated Press where they got leaked internal documents that basically said the Communist Party at the top levels, like this is Xi Jinping himself, this isn't local officials in Wuhan where the coronavirus epicenter was. This is Xi Jinping, top levels of the Communist Party, knew that they had a huge epidemic on their hands on January 14th.
Before January. They must have known before January 14th.
Before January 14th.
Because that's when the memo went out. I mean, I think if you just think about it for a second, that only makes sense. Because how can you argue that China has done such a great job of, mobilizing and, containing the virus and also argue that the top leadership didn't know about it for 3 weeks?
Yeah. But so the point is they knew about it, but Xi Jinping did not announce it to the public till January 20th. They sat on it. And this was during the period when the Lunar New Year was beginning, Spring Festival, as they call in China, when millions of people began to travel. That includes people traveling in and out throughout Wuhan and abroad. So really, at a time when they could have clamped down on it, they allowed it to spread around the world. I'd actually have heard, I haven't looked into it to see if it's true, but that they started to shut down internal flights within China, but not flights abroad.
They blocked flights coming from Wuhan to other parts of China after January 20th. I think it was maybe the 23rd or something like that, like when they started shutting off Wuhan from the rest of the country and Hubei province from the rest of the country, but they didn't block international flights,
From the rest of China.
Yeah. They didn't block international flights. I don't think they blocked international flights from Wuhan either, because their concern was mostly Wuhan going to the rest of China.
But not Wuhan or the rest of the world going to each other.
Well, no, but also pretty soon after that, flights from Wuhan were being blocked to different places around the world.
Which was very racist.
Well, it's funny when you look back at it because... Remember, this all happened in the course of like 2 weeks or 3 weeks from the time that this started to be, okay, now it's becoming an international issue. The first international case was in Thailand, like on January 14th or 15th, something like that. Actually, it might have been the 13th because then that's when this internal meeting happened on the 14th to respond to the idea that it was now spreading internationally. The interesting thing about this meeting, though, it wasn't that there was no news about this mysterious, what was being called the Wuhan pneumonia inside China at the time.
Please don't use those racist terms, Shelley.
Yeah, pneumonia is very racist.
But the because I watched this CCTV episode where they did this in-depth report about the mysterious Wuhan pneumonia that aired on January 15th. And they had China's CDC experts on to ask them how serious this was and, like what people should be doing. So it wasn't that there was no news about this at this point, because I think it was end of December when they finally had first publicly reported it. So at this point, people in China are already worried. There's already state-run media are even talking about it.
But in the state-run media report.
Yeah, in that report, they kind of downplayed the idea of human-to-human transmission, because the anchor asked the CDC guy.
This is the Chinese CDC.
Yes.
Yeah.
The China CDC guy outright about whether we should be worried about human-to-human transmission. And he was like, oh, well, we've been studying the cases very carefully. We've been looking at them. And we've been doing a lot of digging, and we're very concerned about this. This is the number one issue. At present, the latest information that we have is that, the risk of human-to-human transmission is low. And then this was a day after this internal teleconference and memo had gone out to provincial health officials from the National Health Commission that said it's the chance of transmission is very high during Chinese New Year, during all this travel. Like, the chance of human-to-human transmission is high. You should be prepared.
And then on January 14th, they got the World Health Organization to repeat their line that it was human-to-human transmission was very low.
Well, I mean, that's because that's what they were publicly saying, was that it was very low. So the World Health Organization just believes everything that comes out of China.
And then the world believed the World Health Organization because that's supposed to be their job. And so really, like, this was, what's a good metaphor? I don't know. It was like the perfect storm, because you have, it was millions of people were beginning to travel in China at this time when they knew they had an epidemic on their hands. They covered up. You had the World Health Organization totally in the pocket of the Chinese Communist Party, which they didn't even spend all that much money on the World Health Organization. China makes up like 0.25% of the WHO funding, and yet that was enough to buy them off.
Well, because it's not really about money, or who knows if it's about money to individual people.
It's all about the Benjamin.
Or the mouse.
All about the mouse.
All about the
mouse.
But
I mean, also that, like, China happens to invest heavily in Ethiopia, which is where the Director General of the WHO is from. But anyway, that's...
And they've influenced the UN for years. I mean, I think it's not really just about money. I mean, we make the joke about ear stuffed full of yuan, which is kind of true.
A nice image.
It's a nice image. But it's also about just years of building up this kind of influence, of kind of bridging alliances with the global south, which is, a lot of these, what we would have before called third world countries.
Well, it's the same thing that we saw with Senator Roth. The Chinese Communist Party has been doing those kind of influence activities, not just with U.S. senators, but, throughout the UN, in developing countries, in the UN, in the European Union, everywhere. And the coronavirus really exposed those activities and how much it really costs the world.
So as more information is coming out, it's becoming clearer and clearer that, they did know, they tried to tamp it down. You could say that maybe they were trying to keep people from panicking, but in that internal government memo, they were talking about we need social stability. It's important to, follow Xi Jinping's lead and make sure that. So basically, in the lead up to the 2 meetings that were supposed to happen in March, so the government meetings, so they were very concerned about the political part of it more than preventing the epidemic necessarily by itself.
Well, when has the Chinese Communist Party ever been concerned about how many Chinese people die?
I mean, it's hard to fathom, I think, from the perspective of someone who's lived their whole life in a Western democracy. But just the idea that, like, their leadership really doesn't care if a lot of people die. They just don't care. And perhaps there are individual officials in China who care, but the Communist Party itself is an entity that does not care and pushes the officials in the party to make these kind of decisions that just bulldoze through human lives like they're nothing. And if you look at from the very early days of Mao's writings, it's very clear that he doesn't care. Mao had written about how, if, the U.S. nukes China, it doesn't matter. We've got, at the time, 600 million people. If we lose 100 million, so what? This just kind of extraordinarily callous attitude towards human life, where political power is the number one priority, and the well-being of the people is only important insofar as it allows the party to maintain that power. It's kind of mean.
Well, I'd say that in addition to worrying about political stability, they're worried now about the economy, right? They just, the coronavirus obviously devastated the Chinese economy like it's doing to economies around the world. And they just released the official GDP numbers from China, which says that the GDP contracted by 6.8% from last year.
So what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's negative 6.8% from what it was a year ago.
So that's a startling admission of a contraction. But given that every year the Communist Party, at least in the last 5 years, if not a lot longer, the Communist Party has overstated the GDP growth figure. For them to say it's a negative 6% growth, it's probably even worse than that. I actually read a report that in some regions, officials are asking factories to run machinery and air conditioners, 24/7 to boost electricity consumption, because that's a metric that is sometimes used to look at GDP growth, because people don't believe the GDP figures.
Well, that's why there will be a stunning GDP recovery in the second quarter that we're in right now.
Right.
It's going to go up by like 12%, so they're back on track for their 6% year-on-year growth.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up by 50% and doubles.
But yeah, the thing you mentioned about the electricity, right? It's funny because Li Keqiang has said years ago, famously to U.S. officials.
Who is the premier of China?
Yeah, at the time he was a provincial level official, but he said that he didn't believe the GDP numbers, so he looked at electricity consumption and other things like cargo and different things. But the first thing I thought of when I read that news was like, sorry, Li Keqiang.
Well, no, he knows how to break the system, so he knows how to do it. That was probably his idea.
Right,
his idea was to fake the electricity?
Cable, but that was from a U.S. diplomatic cable that had, reported on what they had been in a private meeting with Li Keqiang and U.S. officials. And then that cable got leaked through the WikiLeaks release. And then that became like a widespread thing, so that, people started looking at those other metrics rather than believing China's GDP figures.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, Li Keqiang, he's basically the guy in charge of the economy. So he knows, like, the good way to do it is to look at the electricity output. So we'll fake that.
Right.
Yeah. So he knows what to fake.
So that's why it's important to have someone in a high position who's really good at cover-ups, because they know how to do the things, on the secondary levels.
That's the meritocracy of the Chinese Communist Party.
Indeed.
I also remember, I think it was this week, that group Victims of Communism. I believe they have now added the coronavirus death toll to their overall death toll of communism.
Are they adding the coronavirus death toll in China or around the world?
I didn't look that closely at it, but I'm going to make up a fact and say, yes, the world.
In fact,
because are we not all victims of communism? Oh, one thing we should talk about is Trump defunding the WHO, the World Health Organization.
Temporarily, while the U.S. looks into it, yes.
Oh, yes. I love the idea that there's going to be a review of the World Health Organization. I wonder what it will find.
I hope that they find a lot.
Yes, me too.
We all know what's going on there.
Oh, that was funny. When I was watching the press conference, it seemed that Trump just made these little asides that he just kind of couldn't help, because he's reading the he's reading the statement and then he
can't help himself.
Yeah. He just has to add a little.
I've noticed that about you can really tell when he's got a script in front of him and he's reading the script and then here comes actual Trump talking. And it's, yeah.
It was just funny because he was like, we all know what's going on there. It was just, yeah.
Yeah, I was amazed how much controversy that caused, though.
Were you, though?
I mean, a cynical part of me is of course, this is the world we have come to. But no, a part of me is surprised because, it is so transparent that the reason the world is in this mess is because the Chinese Communist Party lied and people died, and that the World Health Organization has continually backed up Chinese propaganda.
Well, no, I don't think that's obvious for people who have not, because the World Health Organization, if you haven't been looking into this issue, and you haven't been reading about the corruption or their toadying to China, it's the World Health Organization, It sounds legitimate, and, everybody's pushing you to go to the World Health Organization for information about the pandemic and all this stuff. And I don't think that all of the information that they're giving is wrong. I mean, people have had issues with some of the information, like travel bans are not good or don't wear masks.
Human-to-human transmission is not happening.
Well, they cited Chinese researchers there, so it wasn't, it's kind of a Weasley way of being like, well, we were just listening to what the Chinese authorities were saying. We just believe our member states. What's wrong with believing our member states, right?
Uh-huh.
Except Taiwan, which is not a member state.
Well, they don't count then. Taiwan province of China is part of China, obviously.
I mean, the UN doesn't recognize Taiwan, so can you blame the World Health Organization?
Well, I mean, WHO is part of the UN. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the whole... I don't think a lot of people really know what they've done, necessarily. I mean, we've been in this since January. So we've been reporting on this constantly since January, so we know. But I think a lot of people don't. So,
right. So it may suddenly seem like Trump is just going after, the World Health Organization because he's anti-health or something.
Well, because he's anti-world, I think is.
Yeah. The argument is, and this was pushed in Chinese state-run media, and then unfortunately picked up in Western media, a lot of Western media, particularly the New York Times, is that Trump is just trying to distract from his own failures by blaming the World Health Organization.
I think that's not actually necessarily something that that the New York Times picked up from Chinese state-run media. I think they both reached that conclusion, possibly independently.
What does that say about the world?
Well, I think, once you've built up these narratives, where are you going to go? If the idea is that Trump has obviously failed and he's obviously somebody who can't fail, he has to blame other people. He's obviously hates world organizations, like he hates NATO, he hates, all these things where he hates what else? The UN, right? Like all these things that, okay, well, Trump is America first. He hates global organizations. He's obviously just targeting the World Health Organization, a blameless organization that is responsible for helping us defeat pandemics. So why would we stop giving them money now? That's obviously bad.
Right. Well, I think that when Trump was campaigning in 2015 and 16, he did talk a lot about what seemed to me to be disengaging with the world. I haven't seen nearly as much disengagement as I thought. So the U.S. alliance with East Asia, Japan, and South Korea are still pretty strong. Taiwan is stronger than it was before. I think that the NATO funding was changed a bit, but it wasn't. I think
it's one
dissolved.
of those things where Trump kind of made a threat about it.
Yeah, but I think once anyone becomes president, then they start to see all the cards on the table, and it's like, all right, well, it really doesn't make sense to actually disengage. And the Trump administration pledged $60 billion to help fund various African countries, kind of to counter what the Chinese Communist Party is doing there. And so what we haven't seen is the kind of disengagement that, I had thought was going to happen when I was looking at it 5 years ago. It just hasn't happened. And in fact, in many ways, there's been more engagement. So if you as a media organization or a reporter are still looking at the same narrative you had 5 years ago, then you're going to come to the wrong conclusions.
Well, I think the thing is that Trump is such a lightning rod. He is so controversial that anything he does is going to be spun, like, one way or another. If you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, like, everything he does is going to be seen through a specific lens. So you have the awkward situation of people just assuming that Trump must be wrong about the World Health Organization. So it's like, if anything Trump says, the opposite of that must be true, or, you know, the opposite of that must be good. So you end up arguing the opposite side regardless of objectively what's happening there, because Trump just sucks up so much of the oxygen that it becomes all about him instead, the way that we've kind of built this media narrative.
Why do people use lightning rod like that? I mean, a lightning rod is something that hovers above us and protects us, keeps us safe, and yet people use it like this bad thing. It's so strange. Don't you think? Don't you think lightning rods are not getting the appreciation that they deserve?
That's true. I mean, you know, what was the world like before lightning rods were invented, which I think was only the 1700s? You know, buildings would catch on fire. The tallest building would catch on fire all the time. You know, you have massive fires throughout cities. It's lightning rods that have saved people. They have saved lives.
So it's allowed civilization to flourish.
People
Is that
can't
what you're
see.
saying, Shelley, that Trump has allowed civilization to flourish?
People can't see my face right now.
You heard it here on China Unscripted. Shelley Zhang, Trump has saved civilization. Feel free to repost that. Her Twitter handle is @ShellZhang. That's SHELZHANG. One more time, Shelley Zhang, Trump has saved civilization. You heard it here first. I have never seen Shelley look so defeated. Unfortunately, we didn't film this episode.
I just was trying to make a good point.
Yes, and then I hijacked it like a coronavirus.
Oh, I was just trying to make a point about... okay. It's like the Atlantic article I saw a few weeks ago where the headline was, "Consider the possibility that Trump may be right about China." Like, there's so many caveats in that headline, which is, consider the possibility that he may be right about China.
Did you hear about this article in The Atlantic? It said that Trump is, quote, right, end quote.
Actually, the Atlantic says Trump is, quote, saving civilization.
Oh, God, you guys, why do you do this to me? Well, actually, speaking of that, briefly, a viewer sent us a page from the Daily Telegraph Australia, which is a tabloid in Australia, and they had kind of made fun of the Chinese Communist Party recently, where they had posted an article that was critical of their coronavirus response, and then had annotated the reply to them where they were like, oh, you know, we'll just, or they had annotated an article where they were like correcting all of the misconceptions or misinformation from the CCP. And they just did a new one where they redacted a letter that the Chinese consulate had sent them to basically be, you know,
like, they redacted it in a funny way where they blocked out the right words so that it essentially had the opposite message of what the consulate's letter had said.
I see. A very visual joke for this podcast.
Yes. It is very visual, but I can...
But we can put it on screen for the YouTube version.
Yes, so you can see on YouTube that it basically looks like a censored document, and it's called Caught in the Redact. And so they would censor things so that, you know, it says, the first line says, China should be held responsible for the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. These claims are convincing. Is China to blame for the original sin, the outbreak? The answer is no. Like, it's just, they've basically blacked out anything that doesn't make, they've blacked out everything that the Chinese consulate actually said, their propaganda stuff, and instead made it seem like the Chinese consulate agrees with us that they're responsible for the pandemic. It's pretty funny.
speaking of apologies, I do want to apologize for something I said last week, which is I was criticizing Dr. Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization, for using the title doctor before his name when he's not, in fact, a medical doctor and he didn't, do his residency or anything. But by using doctor, it makes people assume he's a physician, which he is not. He has a PhD in community health. Where I misspoke was that I had said that people shouldn't use honorary degrees to something. Anyway, honorary was not the right word, and I had misspoken. So I apologize for that. And I want to clarify that I apologize for if it seemed like I was insulting people who have PhDs. No matter what your PhD is, it's a lot of work to get that. And it's perfectly appropriate to use the term doctor if, people understand, I'm a doctor of art history, and, people get that in that context. So that's fine. But just when Tedros is using it to make people think he's a physician when he's not, I felt like that's disingenuous. So sorry for the confusion. Mad respect to people who have PhDs.
I don't know, man. I gotta disagree with you. I think PhDs are a load of crock. Are you telling me that a PhD is smarter than the peasant farmers who support the country, who are the salt of the earth? I think these PhD candidates would be a lot smarter if they would just, go live with the peasants for a little bit, learn how to use their hands, grow some crops. I think that's a better idea.
Get political education from Mao's Little Red Book.
Is
that what you're going for?
Exactly. They would learn so much more from the great peasant farmers, not this elitist, oppressive view of life.
I think people who don't know about the Cultural Revolution would have been really confused by this.
Who is listening to the China Unscripted podcast that doesn't know the Cultural Revolution?
Well, I mean, you may have heard the Cultural Revolution, but not know specifically about the send down to the countryside.
The idea that is actually what they believed and did.
So your dad, Shelley, had a PhD in physics, but also during the Cultural Revolution, he had been sent to the countryside.
Yep, both my parents.
So, in which case did he learn more, from his PhD or from, studying Mao's Little Red Book while farming in the countryside?
I'm going to go PhD over harvesting watermelons.
Oh, yeah? With his PhD, was he able to feed the people of China with his protons and quarks? Or did he get some good work done by giving people watermelons? What's more important, Shelley?
Oh, gosh. Actually, speaking of, my parents didn't learn a lot of things in school that we learned. They didn't learn history because they grew up during the Cultural Revolution. So they learned, they actually did learn about crop farming, socialist crop farming methods, rather than learn about, the history of China.
And again, what good does knowing about the Stamp Act of 1768 do me? Now, if I knew how to grow some rice, man, I would be in such a better situation in this coronavirus right now, don't you think? Quarantine at home, I could start myself a little nice rice paddy.
I was going to say, that would not help you. You cannot start a rice paddy in your apartment.
Well, I can't because I don't know how.
Well, the thing about learning history is we do learn it in the West, but we, of course, very quickly forget it. So,
except for the Stamp Act.
Well, they really drilled that into my head.
I hope you got the date right.
I did.
Okay.
He's 100% sure.
And on that note, thank you for listening to China Unscripted. Really, if you want to learn something, go to the farm. You'll actually be productive.
I don't think that's allowed right now.
That's a fair point. Well, go online and learn how to farm.
There we go.
Watch YouTube videos on farming. They're very slow.
Wait, hold on, guys. I have an idea for a new YouTube channel.
Farming Unearthed?
There you go. Farming Unearthed.
Oh, God. All right. Well, thank you for listening to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley John.
And I'm Matt Canesta.
See you on the farm.